In 2008, as the global financial crisis was tearing through aerospace order books, Bombardier did something almost reckless. The Canadian manufacturer formally launched a brand new, clean-sheet narrowbody called the C-Series, designed to slip into a 100 to 150-seat gap that Airbus and Boeing had quietly abandoned. The aircraft promised 20% lower fuel burn, an 18.5-inch wide seat in economy, and the largest windows in the single-aisle market. Engineers called it the most advanced small jet ever built. But the program nearly killed its own manufacturer. Development costs ballooned past $6 billion. Boeing filed trade complaints. By 2018, Bombardier handed the entire program to Airbus for a symbolic fee. For most of the decade since, the commercial aviation industry has accepted a painful truth. The A220 is a beautiful aircraft that nobody can quite figure out how to scale. It is loved by Air Baltic, treasured by Swiss, deployed cleverly by Delta, enabled JetBlue's expansion, but it never broke out of its niche. Then, on May 6, 2026, in Mirabel, Quebec, AirAsia signed a firm order for 150 A220-300s, with options for 150 more, a deal valued at approximately $19 billion at list prices. It is the largest single firm order in the A220 program's history, and it pushed the aircraft past 1,000 firm orders for the first time. AirAsia is one of the world's most aggressive low-cost carriers. Its entire business model is density, frequency, and ruthless unit cost reduction. The A220 was built for regional comfort, for thin transcontinental routes, for airlines that valued passenger experience over packing seats. These two philosophies should be incompatible, yet every narrowbody competitor, from Boeing to Embraer to Airbus's own A320neo program, is now watching the A220 with concern. So, how can a niche regional aircraft suddenly become the platform underpinning Asia's most aggressive budget carrier? To understand why AirAsia is betting its future on 150 A220s, we need to understand why this aircraft has spent nearly a decade trapped in its specialist corner. The C-Series, now the A220, was designed for a market segment everyone agreed existed, but nobody had served properly. The 100 to 150 seat space sits awkwardly between regional jets, like the Embraer E-Jets, and mainline narrowbodies, like the A320 and 737. Aircraft that could fly the missions couldn't fill the seats. Aircraft that could fill the seats couldn't fly the missions profitably. The trade-off seemed permanent. Bombardier's clean-sheet design solved this. A composite wing, an aluminium lithium fuselage, and the brand-new Pratt & Whitney PW1500G geared turbofan engine delivered roughly 20% lower fuel burn than the previous generation jets it would partly replace. Cabin width sat between regional and mainline standards. Range stretched to 3,400 nautical miles in the larger A220-300. The aircraft worked, it just didn't sell fast enough. Operators who bought it loved it. Delta now operates 85 A220s, the largest fleet in the world. JetBlue runs 63. Air France took 56. Air Baltic built its entire airline around 55 of them. Breeze Airways operates 57. But notice the pattern. These are premium regional networks, transcontinental thin route operators, and boutique carriers. None of them buy the aircraft to fly 30 turns a day at maximum density. The A220 became the aviation equivalent of a specialist tool. Brilliant at one job, ignored everywhere else. Airbus inherited a program with deep financial losses, slow Mirabel production rates, and a Quebec government partner that has its own interests. Then, in 2025, Airbus quietly attempted a partial answer. The manufacturer launched the airspace cabin upgrade for the A220, replacing the last visible traces of Bombardier's original interior with wide-body style overhead bins, offering 20% more luggage volume, advanced LED mood lighting, and a cleaner aesthetic that matched the rest of the Airbus family. It was a signal. It was an Airbus product, sitting at the bottom of a single-aisle family that ran all the way up to the A321XLR. But the cabin refresh alone wasn't enough to crack the mass market. The A220-300 was still certified for a maximum of 149 passengers, a limit tied directly to the number of emergency exits. As long as that ceiling held, the aircraft couldn't compete on unit cost with a 180-seat A320neo or a high-density 737 MAX 8. The A220 remained, in pure economic terms, a dozen seats or so too small to seriously threaten the mainline narrowbody segment. Airbus needed something else. It needed a configuration that didn't yet exist. Then, in 2026, Airbus engineers finalized a modification that adds an extra overwing emergency exit on each side of the A220-300 fuselage. That single change lifts the certified maximum to 160 seats. AirAsia became the launch customer for that 160-seat layout, and suddenly, the entire economic conversation changed. What Airbus and AirAsia have agreed to create represents one of the most aggressive repositionings of a commercial aircraft platform in modern aviation. The standard A220-300 has historically flown in roughly 130 to 140 seat configurations. The AirAsia variant carries 160. This isn't a minor adjustment. AirAsia is adding nearly 20% more revenue passengers to every single flight without changing the airframe itself. Why does this matter so much? You see, the A220's economics were always anchored to a fundamental compromise. The aircraft delivered exceptional fuel burn per seat, but only at moderate seat counts. Every empty seat above break-even was pure margin. Every seat below break-even was a problem. By pushing capacity to 160, AirAsia transforms the cost per available seat kilometer profile. The same crew, the same airport fees, and the same maintenance cycle now get spread across more passengers. Of course, there is a cost. Aviation regulations mandate one flight attendant per 50 passenger seats. Crossing the 150-seat threshold means AirAsia must roster a fourth cabin crew member on every flight, raising labor costs. There's also a subtler trade: passenger comfort. The A220's defining brand attitude becomes harder to preserve. The 18.5-inch seat width stays, the 2-3 layout stays, and the large windows, they stay too. But pitch likely compresses and the cabin feels denser. AirAsia is comfortable with this trade because density is the entire point. Tony Fernandez, the CEO of Capital A, framed it bluntly at the signing ceremony. The answer to volatile fuel prices isn't to stand still, it's to double down on efficiency. The aircraft now becomes a unit cost weapon rather than a comfort proposition. The really explosive question, however, isn't about cabin density at all. It's about whether Airbus is about to stretch the airframe itself. For years, industry analysts have speculated about an A220-500, a stretched variant that could carry roughly 180 passengers and slot directly into the heart of the mainline narrowbody market. Reuters reported earlier in 2026 that Airbus had begun preliminary sales talks for a larger A220. Rumors persistently point to a potential formal launch announcement at the Farnborough Airshow in July 2026. AirAsia's Tony Fernandez applied direct public pressure at the Mirabel signing. He told Airbus that if they build the A220-500, AirAsia will buy 150 of them. That is, he said, the aircraft they really want. Air Canada, Air France, Delta, and others have all publicly urged Airbus to launch the stretch. Faury, however, has tempered expectations. Airbus, he said, is not close to launching stretch versions of the A220. The existing program must first approach profitability. But here's where the strategic logic gets genuinely fascinating. A stretched A220-500 would overlap directly with the Airbus A320neo. On paper, that sounds like self-destruction. Airbus would be building an aircraft that competes against its own best-selling narrowbody. Yet, the A320neo family has already shifted dramatically toward its larger sibling. The A321neo backlog now exceeds 5,000 aircraft. The A320neo itself increasingly looks like the awkward middle child, too small for trunk routes, too expensive for thinner ones. You see, Airbus may have calculated that cannibalizing itself is far better than leaving the gap open for Boeing, Embraer, or a future Chinese clean sheet competitor. If the A220-500 can deliver lower trip costs than the A320neo on medium-haul routes, Airbus could quietly reorient its entire narrowbody strategy. The A321neo becomes the high-capacity workhorse at the top. The A220 family, including a stretched 500 variant, takes over the bottom and middle. The A320neo gradually fades into a secondary role. Two pillars, both Airbus. Boeing left with the struggling 737 MAX 7, which still hasn't been certified due to ongoing engine anti-ice issues, and the MAX 10, which faces similar delays. Most narrowbody competitors cannot replicate this strategy immediately. Boeing's most direct competitor to the A220-300 is the 737 MAX 7, but the MAX 7 has been stalled by certification delays tied to engine nacelle thermal damage risks. The FAA expressed confidence in early 2026 that certification might complete by year-end, but deliveries aren't realistically expected until 2027. Every month the MAX 7 remains uncertified, Airbus consolidates its position. Airlines lock into long-term A220 fleet ecosystems. Once that infrastructure exists, unwinding it becomes nearly impossible. Embraer's E195-E2 presents a different problem. It shares the same Pratt & Whitney GTF engine technology and, on paper, offers excellent economics. But the airframe is already heavily stretched. Embraer has limited structural runway to push the E2 further upward into 160 or 180 seat territory. The Chinese Comac C919 exists but lacks Western certification and global support infrastructure. This leaves Airbus with a competitive moat that's widening, not narrowing. But the A220's future isn't guaranteed because the aircraft still faces two serious problems that could collapse the entire scaling strategy. The first is production. Airbus initially targeted a production rate of 14 A220s per month by 2026. That target has been pushed back. The new goal is roughly 13 aircraft per month by 2028. Supply chain bottlenecks at both Mirabel and Mobile assembly lines have forced Airbus to airlift wings from Belfast just to keep production moving. Airbus delivered 62 A220s in the first 9 months of 2025, aiming for 100 handovers across the year. It ended the year with 93. The math is tight. To absorb 150 AirAsia aircraft on top of existing backlog, Airbus must execute flawlessly. The second problem is far more dangerous. The A220 depends exclusively on the Pratt & Whitney PW1500G geared turbofan engine. There is no alternative, no CFM option, no Rolls-Royce variant, nothing. And that engine has suffered catastrophic durability problems. By November 2025, nearly 20% of the global A220 fleet was grounded, waiting for replacement parts and scarce maintenance hangar capacity. The consequences have been severe. Swiss grounded its entire fleet of 9 A220-100s for months, cannibalizing engines to keep its A220-300s flying. Air Austral retired its entire A220 fleet, after averaging just 1.75 aircraft available throughout the year. Egypt Air sold all 12 of its A220-300s to the lessor, Azora, to exit the type entirely. Pratt & Whitney's parent company, RTX, has promised to cut aircraft on ground to near zero by late 2026, expanding maintenance capacity aggressively. AirAsia has signed a 12-year engine-wise agreement directly with Pratt & Whitney to lock in support. If RTX delivers on those promises, the A220 airframe suddenly looks like one of the strongest products in the market. If it doesn't, Airbus will keep selling an aircraft that airlines love on paper but can't operate reliably. The significance of the AirAsia order is about what one order can do to an entire industry's assumptions about the small narrowbody segment. For most of the past decade, the A220 was treated as a curiosity, a beautiful niche product that worked for a specific kind of airline: premium regionals, transcontinental thin route operators, boutique carriers willing to pay for passenger experience. The aircraft was never seen as a serious threat to the established A320 and 737 economics. It was too small, it was too expensive per copy, it was too engine-troubled, it was too slowly produced. AirAsia's order doesn't just dispute these assumptions, it detonates them. Because AirAsia is not a premium regional carrier, it is the most aggressive low-cost operator in Asia, with a business model built entirely on density, frequency, and unit cost reduction. If the A220 works for AirAsia, it could work for others. The 160-seat configuration creates a new category, a small narrowbody with the comfort attributes of a regional jet and the unit economics approaching a mainline aircraft. An aircraft that could profitably open secondary Asian markets, smaller European cities, and underserved African routes that a 180-seat A320neo would never fill. AirAsia plans to deploy these aircraft across ASEAN and into Central Asia, opening routes that don't currently exist and freeing larger A321neos for the trunk operations they're optimized for. The strategic implication is that the entire narrowbody market may be about to fragment. Yet every narrowbody competitor must now account for what Airbus is demonstrating with the A220 program. The assumption that small narrowbodies must remain niche is suddenly vulnerable. The assumption that low-cost carriers can only operate dense 180-seat aircraft is no longer absolute. The assumption that Boeing and Airbus segment share the mainline narrowbody market between them is being quietly rewritten. Boeing built decades of dominance on the 737 family. That dominance becomes less stable when a smaller, more efficient, more passenger-friendly aircraft can profitably serve the same low-cost mission. Airbus is proposing something different with the A220. Strategic impact can come from filing gaps competitors haven't recognized exist. The A220 doesn't replace the A320neo. The A320neo will continue serving thousands of routes. The 737 MAX will not disappear. The mainline narrowbody segment will remain enormous. But the A220 creates something new, a demonstration that the small narrowbody segment, long dismissed as commercially marginal, can become a mass-market platform if the configuration, the customer, and the manufacturer all align. In 2008, Bombardier launched the C-Series because there was no alternative. The Canadian manufacturer needed a clean-sheet aircraft to escape the regional jet trap. The program nearly bankrupted the company. Workers in Mirabel endured years of uncertainty as orders trickled in and financial losses mounted. The C-Series was born from desperation rather than confidence. 18 years later, AirAsia's order represents the complete opposite. Not a compromise forced by circumstance, but a deliberate choice by a low-cost giant to bet on an aircraft the rest of the industry had written off as a specialist tool. A choice to prove that the small narrowbody segment is no longer a limitation. When those first AirAsia A220-300s begin entering service in 2028, they'll carry 160 passengers, each across ASEAN routes that currently don't exist. They'll do it from secondary cities that no mainline narrowbody could profitably serve. 150 aircraft, with options for 150 more, and proof that sometimes the most significant transformations in aviation don't require new, clean-sheet designs. Hey, before you go, the YouTube algorithm thinks you're going to like this video next, so why not check it out?